much for joining us for today's program, Understanding Today's Philanthropic Landscape, Giving Trends, and the Evolving Role of Donor-Advised Funds, presented in partnership with one of our generous sponsors, CCS Fundraising. My name is Kristen Welch. I am the Director of Development at NAMI, New Hampshire, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I'm a board member and the program committee chair for the New Hampshire and Vermont Council of Charitable Gift Planners. So we are absolutely thrilled to see this great turnout today. Thank you so much for joining us in this beautiful space. I know today's program is going to be a morning full of learning for all of us. So thank you for being here. The Council's goal is to provide high-quality, affordable training, peer support, and networking opportunities for professionals throughout our 2 states and beyond. We are a membership organization, and so educational programs like this one are offered to our members at no cost. So if you are not already a member and you're a part of a nonprofit organization, it's only $125 for the year to become a member, and you get to come to programs like this for free, and then you also get a discount on our annual meeting and conference, which will be held on May 20th right back here at Billings Farm. We'll be using a lot more of the space for that. We'll be in the auditorium. Weather permitting, we might be able to be outside a little bit, so please do join us for that. There's a QR code on your tables where you can find more information about the conference, but we have a great lineup planned for you. And also be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and sign up for our emails if you're not already, so you don't miss hearing about some of our upcoming events. So we couldn't offer programs like this to you without the generous and steadfast support of our wonderful sponsors. So I want to give a big thank you to our trustee sponsors, CCS Fundraising and Crescendo, our planned Giving Day presenting sponsor, Northeast Legacy Group of Raymond James, our benefactor sponsors, the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and the Vermont Community Foundation, our legacy sponsor, Thompson & Associates, and our executor web sponsor, Carlson Investments. So if you are interested in learning more about sponsorship, please see any of the board members, and we're happy to help you out with that. So thank you. Let's get a round of applause for our sponsor. So we have a great panel planned for you today, and to start us off, I'm going to introduce Kate Villa, who is a partner at CCS. She is a native Vermonter, and she is a brilliant fundraiser that I've known for many years. So thanks for being with us today, Kate, and for having this panel discussion.
Good morning. So excited to be here. I was very excited to drive here. I am a native Vermonter, and I came over not 1 but 2 covered bridges since I made a wrong turn. So it's great to be here. And as we think about the program today, Jack is going to present some fantastic data on the philanthropic landscape. And so when you think about how in a time like this you raise money, it's really important to think about what donors are thinking about in the macro landscape. If you get inside their head, what are the economic forces? How are they thinking about their assets? How are they thinking about different sectors? And how do you fit in? So Jack's going to give us some really good data about that. And then we're going to have a panel, and I will introduce our panel when we get to that time. But we have Raymond James and the Vermont Community Foundation here to talk about donor-advised funds and really how people are thinking about assets these days. Because, of course, if you can get people to give you cash, that's great. If you get them to give you your assets, it's even better. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Jack, and thanks for having us.
Thank you, Kate. Good to see everyone. Thank you so much for spending part of your morning with us here. We are excited to talk all things national philanthropic landscape and then diving into a panel discussion here. I'll start with 2 little bits of housekeeping. First and foremost, thank you to Kristen Welch and the group here for putting this together. Got to know Kristen through AFP and NE, so they're hosting a conference April 7th through the 9th. Pop up to Burlington for that as well. But today we're excited to really look at some of the trends with a more planned giving focus and thinking about donor-advised funds and gifts of assets. I'll also start by saying everything you see here today we will share in follow-up by way of data. So we're going to go through the data a little bit on the quicker side so that we can really dive deeper during the panel discussion. But most of the data that you're going to see today comes from CCS Fundraising's 2025 Philanthropic Landscape. We partner with Giving USA and the Indiana School of Philanthropy every year to review the philanthropic trends. The data comes out usually about 6 months later, so this is 2024 data that we looked at in 2025. We also then have carried out a 2026 philanthropic pulse which then surveyed the actual folks on the ground in philanthropy. These are chief advancement officers, development teams, really understanding a little bit more about how those trends manifested. So we'll see some of that as it relates to 2025 trends as well. Both reports we'll have linked at the end here, so please feel free to check those out. A lot more data in depth on those. But we always like to start just by thinking about the economic landscape in which we reviewed this data. And so now we're going to go all the way back to 2024 to start. And when we think about 2024, this was a pretty phenomenal year for all major indices and for the economy as a whole. We saw the S&P 500 significantly go up. GDP grew by 4.7%. We see some strong economic indicators, which reflected in the donations as well. We saw philanthropy continue to tick up, which we'll talk about in a moment. But especially as you're thinking about GDP, while there's some peaks and valleys in philanthropic giving overall, philanthropic giving usually tracks around 2% of GDP, which we'll see in a moment. So we oftentimes like to laser in on the GDP in particular. 2025 saw some similar trends as well, right? Some of the data still coming out. We'll get it later this quarter, but we see that, still that increased giving, although a little bit more modest in some of it. S&P going up by 17.9, Dow and NASDAQ as well. Still seeing some strong growth. We're waiting on some of the data there, but 2025, again, strong economic performance as we're thinking about this lens. I know that's something on top of mind for everyone right now as we're watching the markets fluctuate and as we're seeing some trends in the cost of doing business, but still nonetheless, we see a lot of the philanthropic giving supporting that. We also would be remiss if we did not recognize the fact that there's been a lot of turmoil in government funding as well in 2024 and 2025 and now 26 as well. And the magnitude of these cuts is pervasive. It drastically outweighs the amount that philanthropy can make up for it. So dollars are a little bit tighter, government funding has reduced significantly, and so it's making it a little bit more challenging for us to feel like we can take our dollars and do the same kind of impact with them. But when we look at that total giving trend over the last 40 years here, we see that dollars continue to go up. And while there's definitely the peaks and valleys that correlate with different economic activity, it's modified and reduced to some extent. So in 2008, we saw the Great Recession there. Markets dropped significantly, and we saw that giving dropped by about 7 to 8%, but much more modest than the market changes that we saw during that time. We also see that, like we said, giving is resilient. It continues to increase as we see it moving forward there, those strong economic years. But when we look at inflation-adjusted dollars, the best time to be a nonprofit in terms of your purchasing power for your philanthropic support was back in 2021. So we see the rate of inflation, things are just getting more expensive. So while dollars continue to go up, it's not being stretched as far as it was back in 2021. But $592.5 billion in all philanthropic support came to organizations back in 2024. When we look at where those dollars went, this is a breakdown based on the sectors that are reported in folks' 990s. And as you'll see across the board here, this is starting back 40 years ago. We see some shifts in what is continuing to be the organizations and the sectors that people support. So as Kate has often said, God is good for fundraising, and we see that with religion here. Religion used to be about half of all philanthropic support. They are still the #1 sector for philanthropic support, but down to 25%. That share has really been taken up by 3 areas. Education continues to increase, but really human and social services, foundations, and then public society benefit. Public society benefits where we're going to see donor-advised funds housed in this graph. And if you especially see the jump from 2015 to 2019 to 2020 to 2024, there's about a 25% increase in the amount that they're receiving. So we see a lot of that DAF activity modified there. It used to be EDS, MEDS, and FEDS in the second round, education, medical causes, and federated giving supports. But now we actually see that human services is coming in at second, with education still strongly at third. So great trends for those in human services, but we still continue to see some fluctuations there. Also, when we think about where those dollars are coming from, we see that 66%, 2/3 of all philanthropic dollars are coming from individuals. When we're looking for donor-advised funds in this map, it's where the source of the income went before it went to the donor-advised fund. So if I'm putting money into my DAF personally, that counts towards the 66% for individuals there. So we still see individuals making up the lion's share. It used to be closer to about 80% as other philanthropic giving vehicles have arose, and foundations is really taking up a lot of that share of what used to be 80%. We do see bequests are higher than corporations despite record high corporate giving back in 2024. Kate also likes to say dead people are still giving more than corporations at this point. So we see that bequests still continue to be a very, very great source of philanthropic support. We do also see the concentration, right? I think folks have all been familiar with the idea of dollars up, donors down, as there's concentration of market resources on an individual wealth side of things. We see it reflecting in philanthropy as well. $1 billion gifts were really what we saw in the top 50 giving table. Is a lot of those gifts are starting to get to the $1 billion level, which is just absolutely incredible to see. Across the 6 donations that happened last year, or 2024, excuse me, that were $1 billion or more in a single transaction, we saw 2 of them go to nonprofits, and then we saw 4 of them going towards foundations or donor-advised funds. I like to single out Reed Hastings from Netflix in this instance. That $1.1 billion was all stock. And that's one of the benefits that we're seeing of giving vehicles like donor-advised funds, is we can handle more complex assets. He didn't have $1.1 billion to give to that donor-advised fund in that moment, but through accepting stock appreciated, he was able to do so. I mean, we also see just transformative strategic philanthropy, right? With Ruth Gottesman creating a full endowed program at that medical school, she's really thinking about how we're addressing a nationwide shortage on doctors. Same with Michael Bloomberg over at Johns Hopkins. We see that strategy, we see assets coming into play, we see concentration of wealth significantly as well. The top 50 donors gave $16.2 billion, about 3% came from the top 50 folks as it came down to their giving. And where most of those donations over $1 million went is, again, foundations, donor-advised funds, followed by colleges and universities, hospitals and medical centers, and some museums. So if I'm gifting $1 billion, $1 million or more, 95% of the time, we see it coming to one of these causes here, but we see the vast majority of that concentration as they're putting them into foundations and donor-advised funds, trying to think more strategically about how they'll use those resources over the years to come versus a one-time gift. We also want to learn a little bit more about why are they choosing giving vehicles. So as we often say, when we're doing conversations during feasibility study conversations with donors, no one's ever saying, I give because of my taxes, right? They're giving because of the tie to the organization, because of their belief in philanthropy, and because of their mission alignment. But when they're choosing their giving vehicles, tax considerations is the #1 factor that we often see. We also see ease of administration, charitable impact, and flexibility as the other core components that we see really as strong assets for donor-advised funds. And as we continue to see the growth of donor-advised funds, they are contributing significantly more. We saw all of the top 3 of the top 4 major donor-advised fund holders. That is Fidelity Charitable, Schwab Charitable, Vanguard, and the National Philanthropic Trust. All 3 saw some significant increases in the assets that they're holding. Fidelity is projecting that by 2030, 50% of all philanthropic activity will be taking place through donor-advised funds. So this is really the more common vehicle that we continue to see, and you see that reflected in the total number of DAF accounts as well, ballooning from 2018 at 861,000 now to 1.9 million in 2022, and that's just 2022 data. Oftentimes there's a misperception about donor-advised funds as well, that there are hundreds of thousands of dollars in assets for every single one. We're seeing that the median donor-advised fund value can be as low as 5 figures. And so really we're seeing this as becoming the more common tool for philanthropic giving. I was mentioning to folks earlier on, my family is starting to just look at a donor-advised fund, and while I wish we could give away 7 or 8 figures a year, we are not doing that. It's really the ease of giving and the flexibility there that we're appreciating. And grants are really starting to be held more at community foundations through the donor-advised funds. So we'll talk about that. Excited to have the Vermont Charitable Foundation represented here. But when you look at our regional charitable foundations, the amount of assets they're holding, significant portions are held in donor-advised funds. And we actually have those numbers in a moment here as well. But we want to know, beyond just the signals and noise, beyond the data here, how is this actually going to be operationalized for you all? And how can we start to think a little bit more about some of these key insights? We're going to look at macroeconomic trends a little bit more, what those will mean, and donor motivations in particular. Especially when we start talking planned giving vehicles, donor motivations come into it a lot more in the conversation. And then we'll look at some operational impacts as well. Again, we saw a huge shift through the tax laws and through the overarching shift of a lot of the funding burdens. Through the tax laws and the burdens themselves, we see about $50 billion being transferred in terms of the burden that nonprofits are now facing. So again, just re-emphasizing, we're really starting to see the impact of the federal government on nonprofit landscape. As we were surveying through our philanthropic pulse, we asked folks, what is the impact that you're seeing? How has this been an experience for you? 47% have had a negative impact on the government policies, or have seen a negative impact because of the government's policies in the last 2 years, with only about 36% saying that there's no change whatsoever for them in terms of doing business. The largest changes that we really see is just an increased demand for services and the loss of funding support. So that's really continuing to put a little bit of a strain on folks as they're then turning to private philanthropy and individual philanthropy to grow it beyond that. And the new tax law changes were talked about a lot heading into this calendar year because there are some significant changes of note. Overall, the projections back in the day were $2 billion to $8.2 billion in projected losses. CCS just published a new report yesterday with the Indiana School of Philanthropy as well. And we noticed that it's actually towards the higher end. We're looking at about $6.5 to $8 billion in a projected loss of philanthropy because of these tax law changes. There's one benefit to the tax law changes, which is the democratization of philanthropy benefiting your taxes as well, because now the standard deduction, you can deduct up to $1,000. And with that inclusion into the standard deduction, we're expecting to see a lot more grassroots donors participating in philanthropy, but the caps that were placed on those at the higher end are really starting to show effect. Reduced caps on corporate giving, the floor there at 1% of their profit has been a big challenge for folks as well. We talked a lot about bunching major gifts before you came into this, but we're also seeing that from folks thinking about how they're going to make larger one-time gifts versus multi-year gifts moving forwards. When we think about those donor motivations, though, the big thing as it relates to this group, and you've probably been hearing for a few years now, is the great wealth transfer. $124 trillion is going to be transferred over the next 25 years, and it's actually taking place as we speak. We're seeing a lot more of the millennials generation starting to inherit that wealth, and as we're seeing those wealth transfers take place, they're thinking about that intergenerational philanthropy. They're thinking about the giving vehicles that will allow them to transfer it as well. And so we're really seeing that. We project about $18 trillion to go directly to philanthropy in that moment, but still see about $106 trillion that will be assets that they'll be able to use in the future. As they're doing this, there's different priorities for younger donors, especially younger ultra-high net worth individuals. And it's not just how we're seeing it play out in philanthropy. This is how they're approaching their wealth management as well. The wealth that they are inheriting, 81% of the families that are inheriting that next generation of wealth are questioning and considering changing from their wealth managers. It's not just on the philanthropic side. The people that helped build the wealth to get there, they're still questioning and thinking about it differently because they're looking for 4 specific components. They're really looking for cause-driven and impact reports, strong focus on impact, and strong reporting opportunities. They're looking for digital-first interfaces. They really want to make sure that they're leveraging technology. AI is coming up in a lot of conversations as well. We see this generation wanting to support multiple charities. There's broader budgets. They're actually thinking about supporting a handful of causes beyond just picking their favorite one. And they're really starting to think about blending philanthropy with businesses and with assets. You know, corporate and social responsibility was how a lot of this generation grew up under, and we're seeing that as well. And we're seeing among the ultra-high net worth families, they are continuing to give. 30% worth $100 million plus have a private foundation. However, we're also seeing a lot of private foundations being liquidated and transferred over to DAFs for a lot of the convenience factors that we're seeing there as well. When we look at the giving overall, we're starting to see Gen Z stepping into their giving as a generation, but they were new back in the 2022 range. 2016 were not reported on. But we're starting to see the retirement effect in terms of cash gifts coming in for the average donation among boomers. Very important to still engage your boomer donor base, to really start thinking about planned giving conversations with them if they've not already taken place. Gen X as well, we're seeing a little bit of that fixed income starting to get a little bit more towards retirement planning and that conservative mindset. But millennials, 40% growth in the average millennial gift during this period. And so our average millennial budget for their household giving. So really a great group to focus on as you're thinking about who's inheriting that wealth. And younger donors, like we mentioned, they prefer different causes and more causes. Part of the growth in social and human services has really been led by younger individuals leaning in and prioritizing that cause. It's great for climate and environmental causes, human rights and social justice, homelessness, tougher religion, a little bit tougher for animal welfare, and a little bit tougher for military-based causes as well, as these newer generations are not focusing on those sectors. But again, 34% have a giving budget. I know I personally have one of just what I'm giving away each month. Monthly budgeting and monthly giving is also a higher priority for folks in those generations. And so we start to see that. But really the giving strategy is also what's interesting. Where does my $5, $10, $50 start to become impactful? And how can I make sure to see that impact on a regular basis? Moving along to some of the operational impacts as we're starting to think about this. Obviously, the life cycle of the donor, we all know moves management more or less. If we do not, great opportunity for us to connect on that as well. But the process has really changed with the advent of the donor advised funds. There's that extra layer that oftentimes comes to engaging with donor advised funds, and it's actually changed the cycle so that it's not just identifying proactively, the identify reactively is starting to come into effect a lot more. You'll get a gift from a donor advised fund and not know who it was from, how that came into be, and how do I steward that gift. So there's a lot more reactive fundraising as it relates to donor advised funds versus getting ahead of it. We'll talk a little bit more about how you can get ahead of it, but this is a common challenge that everyone is dealing with. I often like to take this moment to highlight another story I heard from Alyssa Wright of the Wright Collective. They were trying to connect with their donor who had just made a 6-figure gift through a donor advised fund. And they had no name, no acknowledgement. All they had was the Unicorn Fund, was what it was titled. So they processed their stewardship, put together their report on the impact. They sent it to the Fidelity officer, and they did it on hot pink paper with unicorns all over it. And they got themed, creative. They started to think about impact and strategy and long-term connection. The donor reached out to Fidelity and said, I'd like to open a direct line of communication, leading to a 7-figure gift. So you still need to operate within the protocols that you have, but creativity, stewardship, and impact reporting are becoming far more important. If you get the opportunity, you also need to try and make some opportunities there, as that's a constant challenge we see for folks with the anonymity around donor advised funds. And that's really what we start to see is we need to make sure that our organizations are ready to accept donor advised funds. 50% of giving coming through donor advised funds by 2030 is Fidelity's projection. How are we going to make sure you're not only ready today, but you're ready to continue to process that volume? For us, what we really see is when we think about the percentage of giving from non-cash assets, we're seeing more organizations starting to have a higher percentage of giving from non-cash assets, which is incredibly exciting to see. For most folks to keep in mind, for the high net worth and ultra high net worth crowd, only about 5% of their net worth is liquid, and that is a kind of a liberal projection there. When you get to lower level incomes, lower capacity levels, you're looking at about 10% is a little bit more liquid. So when you start talking with those high net worth and ultra high net worth donors, you really need to start talking about gifts of assets, and planned giving and donor advised funds obviously fall into that. But when we start to see percentage of revenue from DAFs right now, a lot of organizations are still at that less than 10%, but some organizations are getting to 50+% of their revenue is coming from donor advised funds. And those are the ones that are really starting to be savvy about how to promote it and how to make sure that you can accept donor advised fund gifts. When you're thinking about engaging that next generation, because again, they may be the donor advised fund holders, or they may inherit the donor advised funds. Oftentimes, folks don't recognize as well, donor advised funds are shifting out for a lot of family foundations because of the ability to build in a legacy within the donor advised fund as well. You can list successor advisors, which allows you to pass on the donor advised fund to the next generation. Also a great opportunity to make a bequest to the gift or to an organization during that time. If I have $100,000 in my DAF, I can plan it so that my children each get $40,000 and the remaining $20,000 goes in that moment of my death to an organization of my choosing. So as you're talking about planned giving and including people in your legacy giving, donor advised funds is a vehicle that you should be having that conversation about as well. It's a little alarming, I can't remember the exact statistic, but the number of people that don't have a successor generation built in or a secondary organization is astonishing. I think it's like 30 to 40%. And if they don't put anyone down and have an accident, all that money goes back to the donor advised fund manager. So in that instance, Fidelity would take the full $100,000 at that point and loop it into their giving.
Sorry, Jeff, that was something that I was going to ask you in the panel discussion. With those 4 big holders of DAFs, do you have any sense of what they are doing proactively to talk about succession planning? Because I'm getting like crickets when I talk to our community foundation. People are like, well, we do, but we don't know how many generate, like they're a little fuzzy on it.
I will defer to our panel on the Charitable Foundation side. I can tell you from Fidelity's perspective, if you do not, last I heard anecdotally, you get 2 emails a year reminding you to set it up. But that's 2 emails out of you're getting a weekly impact report from them, you're getting reminders to make your 5% recommended DAF payment for the year or granting. So it's very minimal is what I would say.
And the Fidelity Foundation gets very excited when instead of the Johnsons having to give to it, they can just take those non-successor DAFs. So
Yeah, especially for the large private DAF holders, this is a big area of them continuing to increase their assets under management. So just a conversation tool as you're reaching out to your donors. Who are those successor generations that are included as you're trying to build that next generation of relationships as well. But again, when we're thinking about engaging that next generation that will be inheriting these donor advised funds, will be inheriting this wealth, 84% of Gen Z support causes they're giving relative to their household income is pretty incredible. This is a very philanthropic generation that's coming up on Gen Z, and the millennials as well. 74% consider themselves philanthropists, not just generous and supportive philanthropists. They are strategic, they have a budget, they are thinking long term as we see it moving forwards. And we really do see that increase in the budgets there for what they're giving. But mobile friendly, digital opportunities, impact reporting, direct connection to what you are seeing on the ground are core components of ensuring successes with these generations. Overall, especially when it relates to the tax laws, make sure you're educated. I was just talking to a client this morning that was saying we're seeing a drop in our corporate sponsorships for our events. Why may that be? And how is the tax laws implementing or affecting that? Tax laws are actually helping incentivize corporate giving for sponsorships, but it's making it more competitive because now everyone wants the corporate sponsorship dollars. So we're seeing things like that. So make sure you're educated there. As always, with any institution or any vehicle that you're looking at, you need to continue to build trust with your donors, trust long-term strategic relationships, especially as we're thinking about retaining folks for a few years moving forwards. Understand those donor motivations, especially when it comes to the giving vehicles. They're liquidating their family foundation into a donor advised fund. Why? What's the change for you? Why is that of interest? How can we move forward with you on the donor advised fund side of things? And then prepare for some different giving patterns, especially bunching was a key thing heading into 2026. Now that the tax law is there, we still plan to see larger gifts in one instance versus multi-year commitments. So just start to think about those as well. Finally, I would be remiss if we did not mention artificial intelligence. If you are not leveraging AI in your fundraising, there are plenty of opportunities to learn more about how to do this. You're not alone. I think the recent stat is, 69% of most organizations don't have a formal plan for how to adopt AI into their fundraising efforts, but AI fundraising is going to be the way of continued impact moving forward, so make sure you're starting to think about it, especially when we look at donor generosity for those that had supported using AI. Major donors, we see that there's a 30% likelihood to support at that level, and it's happening right now. Boston Public Library rolled out a virtual engagement officer, replaces a single major gift officer and can work with a few thousand individuals at any given time, and then passes it off. Meet Leo. He's Leo the Lion. He's very friendly. It's easy to work with him. Check it out. Start having the conversations because this is happening right now. And especially as we're starting to think about AI-generated content If you now have to do a lot more impact reporting for your donor advised funds, how are you not rewriting the same impact report 100 times, but are customizing it and personalizing it? AI is a great opportunity that we see in that as well. Couple of things just for Northern New England in particular, because we wanted to at least call out the 3 major institutions here that are holding DAFs at this point: New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, the Vermont Community Foundation, and the Maine Community Foundation as well. And when we look at this, the reporting differs institution by institution, but we just see the prevalence of donor advised funds. We see Fidelity's projection of 50% really starting to come to fruition here. When we look at the grant making that happened at the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, all of their grant making last year was $72 million. And I want to say that donor advised funds was roughly in the 20 to 30 range on that. But their assets are about $1 billion, just over. Donor advised fund assets is $440 million. So donor advised funds is roughly 50% of the assets that we're seeing over at the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. Vermont Community Foundation as well, we see that out of the $52.1 million that they did in all grant making last year, $24 million came from DAFs. And that came from 370 DAFs. So those folks made, again, support multiple causes. So we see that they're giving out a lot of grants. They're supporting multiple organizations in those moments, and they're doing it to a pretty high dollar amount value, which is exciting to see. And then for Maine, we see 84 million in all grant making, 48 million, over half, coming from DAF grants last year out of the Maine Community Foundation as well. And their asset pool is $301 million in assets across 467 DAFs. So again, these community foundations, great partners, but also this is where we're seeing the money starting to concentrate through the donor advised fund landscape. Now, I want us to get into the panel discussion because we're going to have some great opportunity in Q&A at the end as well. But before we do, just a couple key takeaways we wanted to flag for folks as well. So again, foundations and DAFs becoming increasingly the first stop for philanthropic dollars, right? People are putting the money there to then give themselves a break to say, now that I have achieved the tax benefit or I have planned my philanthropic budget, where do I go from here? It's a higher level of strategy, there's a higher level of long-term thinking, and it really makes it so that we need to ensure that we're prominently featuring outcomes, impact, long-term strategic planning in our conversations with donors. We also want to make sure that you're integrating gift and estate planning and donor conversations. The average will is made, I think it's 35 years old is roughly what we see, is when the average first will is starting. And so people are starting to think about their legacy and their long-term planned giving potential as early as 35. And one of the conversation statistics that we like to highlight is that if a donor makes a planned gift, they will usually actualize more than double that value during the lifetime of the donor. So you get if I made a planned gift for $500,000, by the time that planned gift comes to fruition, I will probably have donated $500,000 to the organization as well. I put them in my will, my commitment is stronger, I want to see them succeed when I'm here as well. So we see that. So continue to do it across all generations, but really start to think about those generational differences, especially as it relates to the millennial donors. Pursue some aspirational goals with confidence. As you saw, fundraising is incredibly resilient, and one of the key determiners of fundraising successes we've seen is just confident, strong visions with a good leadership team that's going to execute on them. And so this is not the time to pull back as much as it is to think about how you want to pitch a vision for your philanthropy and get out there and make sure you're pitching those goals with confidence. Focus on growing investments in endowments and core programs as well. We're actually standing up more endowments for social service and human service organizations than I had previously seen, largely because they've seen the instability in the federal funding environment. Their donors appreciate it and say, we use DAFs, we can appreciate the growing investment opportunities. Let's put into an endowment at a social and human service organization. And then finally, educate on tax laws as well. Continue to focus on those increased annual gifts and start to think a little bit about how bunching might be a factor for folks. But with that, I want to turn things over to our panel discussion. We'll start bringing up the panelists here in a moment, but as we do, I'll also just put up on screen here the QR codes to both of those reports, if you'd like them. We'll send them out and follow up in the slides as well, but just we'll have that as we start to set up here.
Such a fun presentation. I love pulling that together every year and looking at the data and thinking about what to say. And so excited that today we can do a spotlight on asset-based fundraising with Chelsea and Sierra. So thank you both for being here. Sierra Rosen's a VP and Trust Consultant with Raymond James Trust and serves the Northeast region. And before that, 15 years with high net worth donors to maximize philanthropic impact. So a career in both philanthropy and assets. And then Chelsea Lord is a senior philanthropic advisor with Vermont Community Foundation. And she also brings 15 years of experience in philanthropy and public service, partnered with foundations and nonprofits at Arabella Advisors to launch and scale social impact initiatives prior to VCF. So really excited to be here today to talk a little bit about trends and what we're seeing in the landscape. So my first question is, like, when you look at these trends and you think about what you see playing out in your world, what would you most want to call out to sort of set the table for this conversation?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. When I was thinking about these trends, it came to mind that VCF actually just had our 40th anniversary about a week ago. And interestingly, over half of all grant making in the organization's history has been in the last 5 or 6 years. So it really just speaks to the growth of intermediary vehicles like donor advised funds. And I think for us at VCF, a lot of that growth was crisis driven. So donors really stepping up and responding to support their communities in the COVID-19 pandemic, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, and then in a few years of back-to-back flood disasters throughout the state. And I think that that's a trend that I think will continue and also presents an opportunity for nonprofits in this current moment where we can think of the federal and state funding shifts that are happening and really constraining resources on the social sector as another type of crisis. I have a donor who recently said to me, what's the difference if someone loses their house in a flood or because it's being foreclosed on or because they can't pay their heating or their water bills? The impact is the same on the community, the human need is the same. And that's just really kind of stuck with me and I think is something that we can all think about in terms of how we do our storytelling about the work that we do, both in a true crisis situation and in the long term, to create vibrant communities and meet human needs. The other trend I would touch on is trust-based philanthropy. So throughout the big growth and kind of crisis response that we've been doing at VCF, we've really pushed our donors to adopt some of these best practices. We've removed reporting requirements from our grant letters. We've streamlined our due diligence processes. We have been encouraging donors to understand the value of general operating support and to make multi-year grants. So that's another big trend for us.
So it's so nice to be here. That was such a great presentation, actually. And I don't mean to say actually, that was just a great presentation. And it's really nice to see. It's so heartening to see that this next generation is so philanthropic. I spent a lot of my career working on the nonprofit side, working to raise money. And now I'm on the other side, working with financial advisors to help them give it away. And, one of the trends that I see is that, it's just getting more and more complicated. There's more and more need. I do think that it's really heartened to see that this next generation is more philanthropic. I think that as you see this more and more money being accumulated in donor advised funds, I think there's a concern about, okay, you've gotten this tax deduction, you're now sitting on it. Where's the actual philanthropic impact, right? It's just growing and growing and growing, and you're not putting it out. And I know that the data says that like 20%. The DAFs distribute 20% each year, but that's a little bit mushy, I think, because we don't know where it's going. It could just be going to another donor advised fund. So I think, one of the trends is I think as fundraisers, you're going to have to continue to double down on being the work you've always known you have to do, which is how do you connect with your donors, how do you show impact, and how do you make the case? Because I think advisors, you should know, you probably know this from your work, like they're not necessarily as a whole incentivized to give that money out. And you said, or Fidelity Charitable, they're very excited when that money stays in there. So what are you all doing on the ground, in the heart, doing the hard work to make sure that you are connecting with your donors and you're making the case and that money doesn't stay just sitting and growing on the sidelines in a donor advised fund? The other thing that I think is a real opportunity, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, is that this younger generation is, I think they're thinking about their philanthropy the way they think about their investments. They want to see a return, they want to see impact. And so I think you're also going to start seeing more around recoverable grants and program related investments where they can expect to get some of the money back. Do you do that? Yeah. So Fidelity Charitable does it. Raymond James Trust, the charitable side, we're looking at doing it too. Because I think also donor advised funds are going to start to be even more scrutinized about how much money is sitting off to the side where they've received a charitable deduction. And so at Raymond James Trust, like one of the things we are doing, the charitable portion is part of Raymond James Trust. We're spending a lot of time talking to our advisors around, you need to be having these philanthropic conversations. You can't just leave this to your clients to figure out on their own. They want to have these conversations. Data is really clear. Clients want to have these conversations. And we also know, I think Jack touched on this, something like 80% of surviving spouses and children, they take their money to an advisor. So advisors need to be deepening their relationships too. So we're working on that on our side. But I think that that is definitely one of the headwinds that you all have to contend with is this sort of inherent and again, this isn't all advisors, but they're not really measured on how they give money away. Like, let's just be really clear about that. That's just not how they're measured. And some of them really believe in the work they do and they're committed. But I think that is a bit of a headwind that you all have to contend with.
So I know it's coming out that Jack shared, I was looking at the slide, $10 billion given away by Fidelity Charitable in 2021. In 2025, it was over $18 billion. That's almost double in 5 years. And so when we think about like the power of donor advised funds, the power of foundations, I want to think a little bit about sort of institutional giving and how we're connecting with donors. So whether it's through their donor advised fund, through their charitable remainder trust, like on the advisor side. And then at community foundations, really, you sort of have two choices, right? I can either give directly to the Vermont Community Foundation and they can make choices about what to do with it. Or I can work with someone like Chelsea and say, I want to express my values and I want to work with you so that my donor advised fund can do that. So when you think about motivations for this asset planning, like whether it's through trusts, estates, donor advised funds, and for you, sort of when you think about, strengthening relationships and aligning philanthropic values, what advice would you give to people in this room about how they can best connect with donor motivations?
Yeah, I think it goes down to you've got to demonstrate impact. And we know more and more that the generations, some of the older generations, they just trusted their institutions. They were happy to give the money away. They believed that they would do the right thing with it. They would give unrestricted loans. That is going down pretty significantly. And so you really got to show impact and you've got to be really clear about that. We know that that's what these younger generations are looking for. They're looking for impact. And so you can't rely that they're just going to trust your organization to do the right thing. So there's another part of the question too.
Well, just if you're thinking about whether it's a trust, whether it's a donor advised fund, any vehicle that sort of has become its own thing, how can you tap into what the donor's motivation was when they were creating that?
Yeah.
When you don't know what it was, right? When you're sitting in this, right? But I'm just looking at Sarah sitting here. Sarah doesn't know, right? Thoughts on perspective on that?
Yeah, part of the reason why I wanted to do this job is I was making what I thought were really great suggestions to the donor around some strategic and tax efficient approaches to their philanthropy that would really set them up to accomplish their financial goals and their charitable goals. And candidly, they'd go take it to their advisor, and a lot of times the advisor was saying they would just quash it. right? So one of the nice things is a little bit being able to swim upstream and work more closely with advisors and come in and say, this could be, here's a couple of different ways you could structure this. Advisors aren't thinking a lot about philanthropy. They're just not. That's not how it's measured for the most part. Eric and Rich are in the back of the room, and Randy, they are thinking about it, but a lot of advisors they're just not. They're pretty candid about that. And so coming in now, I'm able to say, look, you've got this donor advised fund, that fits really well, but have you thought about some of the tax strategies around using a charitable remainder trust with highly appreciated stock? Are you doing direct indexing? Are there decays in their ability to tax harvest? Is there an opportunity then to pull this all together and make a big difference for your client? And I feel like my microphone is on now in the room a little bit, I have to say. But I think there is a hurdle on how you're going to work with your donors and what their relationship is like with their advisors. Because I think that's driving more of it. I think that has playing a big role in the donor advised fund, and that's just what their advisors are suggesting. And it's also very easy, right? Like some of these other pieces, they're just complex and no one really wants to deal with the complexity either. So I think that's a hurdle that you have to think about, or how you're dealing with your marketing, how you're making it really accessible, and how you're thinking about working with advisors.
Yeah, I would add, I think another trend is that we see donors using many vehicles for their giving, increasingly kind of complex systems across foundations, investment vehicles, donor collaboratives, donor advised funds. And so for us at VCF, the donor advised fund is often the entry point for our relationships with donors. Donors who choose to work with us are really drawn in by the idea of being plugged in with a community of like-minded givers who are interested in supporting, purpose and place-based giving in Vermont, and who really value the kind of relationships that VCF has with nonprofits, the insights we can provide into the trends and opportunities and shifts in the landscape on the issues they care about. But many of them have other vehicles and other tools in their giving kit. That includes giving out of their IRAs, giving across other DAPs with commercial foundations. And so we really try to take a holistic approach in our advising and to helping them think about their gift planning kind of across the board, and which organizations might fit into which buckets and what their budgets are, and then eventually over time going deeper and helping them think about legacy giving and planned giving and next generation engagement and all that stuff. I would add that I think Jack said something earlier that I think really resonates with us too about, separating the tax benefit from the giving. And that's kind of how we talk about donor advised funds often too, is it gives the donor space to make giving decisions that feel good to them and that are aligned with the causes they care about at the velocity and volume and value that feels right for them. And that those decisions are kind of separate from your annual household budget, tax planning, just gives them more space. And so I think that I would say on the nonprofit side, if you receive a gift from a donor advised fund, to me that would be an immediate flag that if that gift doesn't already meet your qualifications for a major gift donor, they have potential to be one. And it should also signal that they're a planned giving prospect, because this is someone who's already being really intentional and thoughtful about their giving and their budget for doing so. And likely, especially if they're working with a community foundation, we are really pushing them and thinking about succession planning and planned giving, especially the longer we work together. And so I would just say that those are kind of flags that I would build into your stewardship system to be thinking about how you can build the relationship and start to have those conversations.
Yeah, actually, one other thing. The other thing I think would be interesting to see, and we'll see how it plays out. I actually don't think tax law has that big of an impact in the long run over giving. It just doesn't. It might have a blip. Jack, I think you and I talked about this when we were prepping this. I think the markets play a much bigger role in how people think about their giving and how wealthy they feel and how comfortable they feel giving money away. And that's, I think, where there's a real opportunity with donor advised funds, right? When the market is down, people don't want to give, or a lot of them have sidelined this money in the donor advised fund. If that's going down anyway, why not pull it out and get it to the charity so it can have an impact? Like, why lose all that money to the market when you can pull that out and you can make an impact in a place you really care about that probably in a down market needs it more than ever in conjunction with all of these cuts. So I think that's a marketing opportunity that people could take more advantage of, is thinking about how you position the impact you can have in a down market.
I love that you said that, because I think last year at the end of the year, Fidelity was saying, you know, we have a $4 billion a month goal for raising money for our donor advised funds, and they were like raising right? Like $8 billion a month, right? And that's just one, right? Like, that's not Schwab, that's not all the community foundations, that's not all the smaller places that are thinking about this, National Philanthropic Trust. And so when you think about what happened at the end of last year, when people said, I don't know what tax law is going to be like forever, but I know what it is right now, and I had a really good year, so I might bundle and think about it. I think that's an opportunity for all of us. There's a lot of donor savings accounts where people are able to think about the cash they want to give through that's already been budgeted. And then I think you're right, we're going to get to the end of this year and they're going to be like, well, I might take a little bit of a tax hit compared to if I did it last year, but I still made a lot of money. And do I want to give it to Uncle Sam, or do I want to take a little bit of a hit and still send it to a charity or my donor advised fund? And so I think like both are true. We saw a lot of stuff happen at the end of last year.
Yeah.
And also, I think when we get to the end of last year, people are still going to be motivated by, if it was a good year, I had a good year, I'm going to give. And then you can think about, are you unlocking what they already gave or what they're going to be giving this year? So absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to just add that I don't think it's great to use these tax incentives to create a sense of urgency, but then once that sense of urgency is over, I just don't think we see the bottom drop out the way we tell ourselves it might use that.
I'm old at this point. I'm not a millennial, and I've seen over time like tax law changes and donor behavior keeps climbing.
Yeah, you see it correlates with the market more than anything else.
Exactly. But I think as we think about whether they're going to give this year in a good year or out of the donor advised funds or vehicles they've already created, we have to engage them. And so I loved Jack's example of like pink unicorn paper, like I don't know if that would move me, but like that obviously, I'm obviously not going to name my fund the unicorn fund either. And so as you think about what would move donors, you know, the effective and maybe least effective ways that you've seen donors affect with either your donor advised funds or other vehicles, love to hear some advice for people in this room who are thinking, gosh, I'm hearing that I need to engage with these people. Strategies.
Yeah, I'll start by saying that many of our fund holders do give in their name. So when you receive a grant letter from BCF, it will often include the donor's name and their contact information. So really encourage organizations to be in direct relationship and stewarding those donors and building the relationship. If it's an anonymous gift, that's what we're here for. We're happy to play that go-between role and to pass along updates, impact reports, thank yous, and all of that information to the donor. I will say that I think one thing that, it sounds so simple, but one thing is just thanking the donor. I think a lot of times we've observed when we're in a fund with a donor at a meeting with a nonprofit, sometimes the beginning with gratitude can sometimes be overlooked, and just the excitement to share updates and kind of dive into the work and the impact that you're having. And so it's one thing I always encourage is to kind of slow down, build in some time to let the conversation breathe, really lead with that thank you, come with a few questions. Everyone likes to talk about themselves, so having smart questions to ask and really being a good listener can just build so much goodwill with a donor. And just to plug the use of AI tools, there was a great webinar last month that the council here hosted, which I thought brought up a great tip, which was that AI is a tool to help you reduce friction in preparation and follow-up. And so surfacing smarter questions to bring to that conversation, it's a great way to do that. Role-playing using the voice feature with Claude is another good way to build your confidence for those conversations. As a cautionary tale, I had a fund holder who hosted a house party last year for one of her favorite nonprofits, invited a bunch of friends and community members. The event was wonderful. We had a good turnout. There was a great presentation by a few board members and staff members. I saw her a few months later for a check-in, and she told me she never heard back. She didn't receive a thank you for hosting the party. She didn't receive any updates about if they had successfully raised money or if they had even followed up with the folks who attended. And so that's just an example of someone who, you know, it took a lot for her to put herself out there and do something like this, and then the organization just didn't follow through the way that we would have expected them to. And so I don't know if she'll be ready to do something like that again for them or any of her other grantees in the future, which is really just a missed opportunity, I think, for everyone.
Yeah, I think slowing down, I mean, because I think there's so much pressure on fundraisers to do so much. That's probably where AI can come in. And I can picture, I love that unicorn story so much. I can picture that if that were me, I'd be like, oh, we just like wring my hands and I guess we'll just never know. So it's so brilliant that they took some time to get creative and think about it and take a swing, right? I mean, could have not worked out, but who's going to not like pink paper in the effort, I think. And I do think that a lot of nonprofits tend to be a little too risk adverse and they worry so much. And I think about when I was working at Brown, we were doing a real estate presentation on, you know, wanting more of our donors to think about giving real estate. And we did a webinar and the title was something like, throw your lot in with us, consider a gift of real estate to Brown. I got in trouble for it. My boss thought it was like too informal, but we had like our biggest turnout. So I think there's just room to like have fun, and I think that's a great way to distinguish yourselves. Is I just don't think a lot of charities are positioning themselves in a very fun way, and I think that you can see that it does actually work and it is effective, and you know people want that personal touch too.
Can I get on the thank you portion of it? If Fidelity sends a gift and it's anonymous, and we send a thank you back to Fidelity, they have an obligation to send that to the donor, or can that end up in the circular file? And if you wanted to follow up afterwards with something, again, that talks about impact or what have you, is there an obligation for them to send that on to the donor advised fund individual? Just trying to think that we have a go-between, we may never know whether that is actually hit or not.
I mean, I think you answered that for Vermont Community Foundation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could say like I know at VCF and NHCF, other community foundations, like we would absolutely share that with the donor. Or if we know that the donor's not really interested in seeing it, our team is at least consuming it to make sure that we're fluent on what's happening and can talk to the donor as we're helping them with their planning. I don't know what the commercial institutions, what their protocols are on that stuff, unfortunately.
I was thinking, I actually don't know what we do either, and I would look into that. I know that we would feel an obligation to do it. We're not obligated to do it. You know, there's no check or balance. I know that at Raymond James Trust we would try. I'll confirm that. But a place like Fidelity, I mean, you all know what it's like when you get the gifts from a Fidelity. They just come in a batch. It's so hard to even, so you can picture a place like Fidelity. It's hard to picture that they are distributing that. We're a much smaller place. We're much more hands-on. We do really care about that. But I think a place like Fidelity, I don't know.
I will just add one thing, which is that I think we all appreciate these type of updates digitally, because if they come to us in snail mail, the chances of it getting forwarded on are a little lower, I think. But if you're sending it to us in email, in a PDF copy, that's much more.
And I can tell you that when you get to a certain level, all of these places you're assigned, an advisor who asks you these questions. So, do you want this forwarded to you? Do you want digital? Do you want print? And the donor can either opt in or out of those things. But I love your advice, which is that send it anyway, because at least the advisor's consuming it, and whether that donor's getting it, you're educating them. So I know there are options in and options out, especially at different levels. So depending on which organization it is, whether it's Fidelity or Raymond James or at any level, if you have a $25,000 donor advised fund versus $1 billion, there are different levels of bespoke criteria that you can put in. Yeah.
I just want to follow up on your comment saying at ECF a lot of the donors identify themselves. And so my question to you, and I know it's a very small portion compared to Fidelity, but is that an active position you're gonna take to help guide them to put their names on stuff? Because when you look at our small nonprofit world, they don't really have the resources or the manpower to even go get the gift. Never mind now on the stewardship side, which is what we're supposed to be doing more of. It's scary that way. So if we can identify and get them to do that, be encouraged to, that would really help.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think the decision of whether to give in your name or anonymously is so deeply personal, and especially in a small rural state, and especially in smaller communities. I work with fund holders both here in the Upper Valley and the Northeast Kingdom. Many of my Northeast Kingdom donors are anonymous because they live in such small towns, and so. Yes, we have instances where over time we've helped fund holders get comfortable with being in direct relationship with certain nonprofits, with becoming known. And we certainly have donors, and I offer this option too, who will include their name on the grant letter, but also add a note that says, please don't recognize me publicly on your website or at your annual report. So they're known to the organization but anonymous to the public. And that's like kind of a nice in-between option that we offer. But yeah, I think that it's also really interesting too. I've had, very engaged community members who volunteer and sit on boards and will do, a small checkbook gift, but then send a much bigger anonymous gift through their DAF because they just don't want that. The level they're worried that the perception of them will change and it'll affect their relationships. So all to say, I think it's going to continue to be a mix across the board, and it's something that we really encourage the direct relationships, especially with our donors, because we just think that's kind of where the magic happens, and so we do really try to facilitate that, especially if they are choosing to stay anonymous.
I just want to ask 2 more questions and then pass the mic back to the room for all of the good questions that are out there. But knowing that this is a planned giving council and that donor advised funds are huge assets, as are trusts and the states, how are you seeing your donors start to think about those assets? So I'll give an example. We're working with a foundation. They're in $1 billion campaign, and talking to one of their largest donors, and they're saying, how would you be willing to give to this? And they said, well, I don't know if I want to give to the foundation just so you can give it out. I don't know who's going to be in charge 50 years from now when I'm not here. But what I do know is that I love what my donor advised fund is doing. So I would be willing, their donor advised fund's worth almost $1 billion by itself. I'd be willing to sign over my donor advised fund as a legacy gift. And so when you start to think about these assets and how these assets can be legacy gifts in addition to people's, assets that they hold other places, how are you thinking about that at VCF and then maybe at Raymond James?
Sure. So I think of succession planning and legacy planning as kind of a puzzle. And fund holders and donors are kind of managing so many different priorities and interests, thinking about, what assets they want to leave to their family, what they want to pass on to the charitable causes they care about. Will they have enough for the things they need in the late stages of their life? There's just so many kind of factors. And so this is one place where we at VCF, we usually like to be in relationship with financial planners and managers and tax attorneys and estate attorneys who are supporting our clients. So we can kind of take help each other, help best serve the fund holder at the center of those conversations. And one thing that we always kind of bring up in these conversations is the question of who do you want to be making decisions about your charitable giving after your lifetime or if you're incapacitated. And the options, the kind of 3 big options are a trusted friend or family member, your children, someone else who can become a successor advisor on the fund, yourself. If you know specifically there are certain organizations or causes that are near and dear to your heart and you want to carve those out to specifically support those organizations who will become the beneficiaries of the fund. or VCF staff, or community members, where we can, structure a community panel or use our team of program officers to kind of guide the highest and best use of the funds over time and as needs change in the community. Different donors are drawn to different options there, and some like to mix and match it. They might carve out a piece of their DAP to support their favorite nonprofit, creating what we call a designated fund, which is almost like an endowment for the organization that's named, and then giving the rest to their children. And sometimes these preferences change over time too. So I always encourage people to also put a succession plan in place, and we can update it later if you change your mind.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to see a through line. I think that it really depends on what they care about, what they want to do. I've just recently worked with, I'm now on the trust side, so I'm seeing like these family dynamics and how complicated they are, and sometimes they just can't even get to the charitable piece because their kids are so complicated and they're so worried about like what's going to happen. They sort of feel like my kids are my charity, but there's no space. But then then I recently had a conversation with someone who's got 3 daughters. 2 are fine, like they're fine. This third one, what are we gonna do about it? I can't just leave her money. She's not gonna be able to handle it. And so I made 2 suggestions. We have this trusted IRA that could be a good fit, but then I said, why don't you also think about, from a tax perspective, think about a testamentary CRT funded with these retirement plan assets. And he really liked that. He really, really liked that. He liked that there'd be this amount coming out. He liked that it was really tax efficient. He liked that it would ultimately go to charity. He liked that then his other 2 daughters, who actually are quite, confident in their lives, they could manage it. So I think it really is sort of like listening, thinking about options, thinking about where they're at, and not getting committed to one particular outcome, right? That's what's so nice about having all these options in plan giving, is that you don't always have to be pushing a DAP, you don't always have to be pushing a bequest. You can listen to what they want to do, you can listen to what they care about, you can listen to their appetite for complexity, and put something in front of them that they might really like, that could be a good fit that you didn't see coming. And so, I guess it comes back full circle, which is knowing your donors, knowing what they care about, and taking some swings around where they might want to land.
And my last question is hopefully really easy, and then we'll take questions from the audience. If you had just like one closing piece of advice to give the group, how can you future-proof your approach to fundraising? How can you think about emerging trends? How can you think about donor behavior, about intergenerational wealth transfer, technology, all of the things that we talked about today? Any advice that you would give before we let the group ask questions?
When I was thinking about this question, I was thinking a lot about multi-year gifts, which we, and I think many DAP providers, offer as an option. We've been really pushing donors to move in that direction, especially in this public funding environment, to really make it easy for themselves to enter a recommendation one time, kind of set it and forget it, but also to give more certainty to the organizations that they're supporting, that they can count on this money for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And that's another plug, I would guess I'd say, to future-proof your fundraising. If you have DAF donors, ask them about multi-year gifts, and not just a verbal commitment, but an actual multi-year grant. And if they are confused by that or not sure about it, reassure them that the Community Foundation does do that, and that we can, refer them back to us. The other thing I would say is just generally an invitation to help us help you. We love to stay in touch with our nonprofit partners. We have a connection form on our website that I encourage folks to fill out at least once a year. Grant making at VCF happens both in a donor-driven way through advised funds and legacy products. It also happens in a mission-driven way with our team of program officers that are managing grants and mission investments. And so that form's kind of the best way to get your updates across the organization. It gives us material to bring to donors and to try to make those mutually beneficial connections. It's also something that, we're available if you have a donor who, you've been talking to about legacy planning, you've been talking to about a big gift, they're expressing some kind of hesitation or you're hitting a wall, maybe there's a role that VCF can play to help to meet your and the donor's shared interests to help structure the gift in a way that could get the donor more comfortable. So I just offer that. We're here both for our nonprofit partners as well as for the fund holders.
Well, I think if you've met one donor, you've met one donor, right? So I think I would just say, particularly at a Plan Giving Council, embrace all of it and don't stop. You're so lucky to have this resource, and the best thing that you can do is just be as up to speed as you are on all the different options and be open to what the new trends are and keep evolving.
Questions from the room? Yeah, Allie?
Thank you so much. I just have a question, similar to it a little bit, but I think how the nonprofit tasks present like a slightly different way of engaging with donors, right? Because there's this intermediary where like their primary point of contact is not necessarily the organization, and so especially with the larger DAC holders, like the Schwabs and the Fidelities, but also community foundations and others, like how do you recommend on the nonprofit side that we make sure that what we're up to, even if we don't really have active donors there today or major donors there today, but we want to be on the radar of the folks who are advising these donors about the great work happening at the work. Is it helpful to just like have a list of like, we send annual reports to these groups, or we reach out and invite them to things? Like how do you recommend sort of, because there's that intermediary, like building the relationship both with the donor and the advisor? Like what's the way, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And unfortunately can't speak to the commercial side of it, but at the community foundation level, I think, yes, it's a multifaceted relationship. You can almost think of it like a triangle, right? There's a donor, there's a community foundation, there's a nonprofit. We all have a direct relationship with each other, hopefully. And so, including if you know who the advisor is for a donor, include us in the emails or the correspondence, invite us to join you if you're having a lunch or doing a site visit. We love to be in community with you and with the donors if we can. Send us direct updates, like I said, both so that we can share with donors and also so we can hopefully direct you to any discretionary or competitive grant programs that might be a good fit. And I also think too, again, like I know that the intermediary role, I think I hope that it's more of a mental block than an actual block. And what I mean by that is that if a donor is named, the giving vehicle is a data point, but I don't think it should change the way you steward them or the type of relationship you seek to build with them. It should flag for you potential opportunities for a bit more giving or for legacy giving, but I don't think it should hold you back from stewarding them as you would any other major donor. And hopefully you can think of VCF and as advocates for you. And that's often what I tell donors, especially anonymous ones who, they might feel a little anxious about like, well, will the nonprofits feel slighted if you're the go-between? And I try to reassure them that my goal in that role is both to make things feel streamlined and safe and easy for them, to really let them feel the joy of giving at the center of it all, and then also to make our nonprofit partners feel like we have more capacity and time to pay attention to them and to be in conversation and staying updated and fluent on their work, which some donors just don't have time. They have kids, they have grandkids, they're traveling, but that's what I spend 40 plus hours a week doing, so.
Yeah, I also think it really depends on what kind of an organization you are. I think if you're higher ed, you've kind of got that built-in community of alumni and you can go more direct. You can make the case to the alumni. I think if you're a different kind of nonprofit, there's a lot of room to start making the case to the advisors that you work with in your community, the legal community. And when I was at Boston Children's most recently, I found that a lot of advisors are really looking to have a really good organization to recommend to their clients. And Boston Children's was one of those places, like no one's really against it. And often clients would go to their lawyers or go to their advisors and be looking for who should I put into my will? I don't know who to put. You know, often they're putting, in my case, it was St. Jude's and Shriners, and we really would rather be Boston Children's. We had a better story to tell. And I think thinking about how you can use your centers of influence around you to make the case for your organization, I think that can play a role in how those centers of influence help direct the money out from the donor advised fund. I don't think you need to go to like the top of the charitable structure at an organization. I would start locally around who's influencing and how you can talk about your impact.
Great advice. Yes.
Hi, I'm Laura from the I had a conversation yesterday with a donor who came in, and part of the conversation was around her feeling a little helpless in the current climate of our country, our world, the news, not to take any sides. And I was just curious, anecdotally, are you having conversations like that with your, they're obviously doing it at a much more sophisticated level, but is that emotional piece playing into your donor system?
Yes. We're probably all experiencing that on some level. I think that the current environment, the changes, the unknown effects that are still to come in future years are really overwhelming. The daily news, and many donors are asking these questions, and we're having a mix of conversations about, you know, doubling down and supporting the organizations and causes you've always cared about, because this isn't forever. But also potentially mixing in something new to your strategy to be responsive to the moment. A framework that I've been using with donors that I really like is thinking about protecting people, so like frontline human services, direct needs to you know, people who are in danger of losing SNAP or Medicaid or other benefits. Thinking about building capacity for organizations, so supporting nonprofits with donor operating support, multi-year gifts, thinking about creative partnerships and shared services and things like that that can benefit and help the sector see this through. And then also building the future that you want to see. So thinking about policy and systems change and what we want our communities to be like on the other side of the current moment that we're in. And so that's something that I've kind of used to try to help people ground themselves and think about where they want to give. The other thing I was going to say too, actually just to plug from my former work, there's a great report on the website. It's hosted by the National Center for Family Philanthropy. It's called Understanding Psychological Barriers to Giving. And it does a great job of kind of bringing in philanthropic expertise and behavioral science to help you better understand, if you're sitting with a donor, if you're talking to them, like what are the things that are showing up for them? Why are they feeling paralyzed? Is it too many choices? Is it not enough time? Is it fear of making a mistake or not giving the best gift that they can? And really also provides really great tactics for how to help them overcome that. And so I think that that's been a really valuable resource to me as an advisor, but I think could also be a great tool to integrate into your fundraising.
I also think, you know, during COVID in particular, people felt, and so during COVID there was, you know, there was that crisis. There was also the George Floyd crisis, and we were all stuck at home watching like the news unfold. It was so terrible. And I thought there was a great opportunity. Many of us couldn't do anything on the front lines, right? Like we're not healthcare workers, but there was a lot of money, and I think messaging around the fact that you can have an impact, even though we all feel it's a way to feel empowered, right? And philanthropy is a form of power, right? Like it's a form of influence. So I think thinking about it that way, and also, you know, you just don't. I think it's helpful to know. I love this idea of doubling down on what you already care about, because what I think has been so brilliant about this administration they've gone after everything at once, right? So everything that so many of us care about has all been under attack, and it's sort of like whack-a-mole. Where do you go? So it's such good advice to just like, what do you care about, and just be really clear-eyed and double down on that. And then I think also understanding how some people really do like to spread the wealth around, and some people want to really concentrate it and have a really clear impact. And so I think just helping to understand what that particular donor is motivated by.
The other thought I'll just add on this is I'm often telling donors that clarity is kind. And so if you are thinking about a change to your giving priorities in response to the environment or what's happening in the world, letting the organizations that you're backing away from know that is what you can do to help them better prioritize their own time and resources, and that's something that we're happy to help them communicate if they feel uncomfortable doing so. And so I just offer that to say that that could be something that you integrate into your conversations if you're sensing hesitancy or that someone's, not being as responsive to you as they used to, is maybe like taking that pressure off and giving them the gracious out could be something that builds that goodwill, and maybe that'll get them to respond to you, or that'll be something that brings them back to you in a few years.
The other thing that I would love to say about that as a response to that question is that more people give than cast a vote every year. So philanthropy is an expression of values, it's the love of humankind. More people participate in philanthropy than vote in democracy. And so especially when you think about the power of the next generation and the values and the budgets and the habits that they're forming, we all know that most of the money comes from a small group of people. But what's that going to look like in 20 years? And how can we start to build hope and a future? You got to get the big gifts, you got to get the money, but if you're not investing in the future and you're not thinking about that participation and all of the people who give, and so I would say have a little hope and go for the gifts. How much time do we have? Two more questions. Yes.
Hi, I'm Karen. I'm from the Center for Safer Communities in Sullivan County, New Hampshire. You all haven't talked a lot about AI, but AI was brought up earlier, and I'm curious to know more about how AI can be used as a fundraising tool, especially within the nonprofit world where we're dealing with a lot of sensitive data that you can't necessarily, I know our policy at my workplace, that we have a pretty stringent AI policy of how we're supposed to use AI and not, because we're dealing with survivor information, we're dealing with confidential donor information, right? And you don't want to plug all of that into AI and then suddenly you have, everyone can find your donor. So I'm curious to know about that balance and where you see the most potential for AI helping with fundraising without stepping over that line.
You also look really good. You should talk about this. You have a good example.
Okay, I'll give my thought first and then I'll pass it back to Kate. So from that same webinar that I mentioned last month, that was where I actually learned if your organization has an enterprise account, you don't have to anonymize this data. It will be protected. And so that's worth bringing back to your operations team as something to consider integrating into the policy or into the budget for next year. Because the idea of being able to take information straight out of your CRM into the AI tool, have it summarize it for you, especially if it's a relationship you're inheriting. It's just that would be such a relief, right? It would help us all work better. Otherwise though, I still use it and I just anonymize everything. I don't say the name of where they live. I take out names of organizations. I take out the name of the donor, and I usually just, start with a prompt that's had this conversation, trying to explain this concept. I owe them this in follow-up. The other thing I'll say too, something that I think is so effective in building relationships and fundraising from donors is being able to repeat back to them something really specifically that they've shared with you that they care about or that they're interested in. And I think Jack mentioned this idea too of don't just send them a generic proposal or impact report. Maybe add a cover note at a minimum that really customizes it and shows them that you heard what they said and you remembered it. And I think AI can be a really great way of okay, how can I draft this in a way that's cohesive, in the same tone, and that really speaks to the donor's specific interest.
Well, I think I use it all the time now, and we were at Boston Children's. We were able to use it too because we had an enterprise account. We have really strict HIPAA rules, but we were able to use it. I think it's going to be such a game changer to all those things that you don't want to get to, or you can't customize quite the way you want to, and that's getting in the way of your donor work, right? So I think that's the way to think of it. What are the things I hate doing that is getting in the way of me getting out there and working with donors? When I was at Boston Children's, we took on an AI fundraiser. And the data was just so crazy. It was something like they were making, I don't know, like a regular annual fund person could make whatever amount of calls they could make. They were just completely eclipsing the ability to like make those calls and cover that ground. And that's like the cold calling that like no one wants to do. So that's really hard to get motivated around. So if you can outsource that, then have those people identified. It's just more time to do really good quality one-on-one work. And I think that segues into what you were talking about.
Well, I'll just share a Kate Villa story. Like, if you would like CCS's perspective on AI and fundraising, we could have a whole conversation about that. But I'll just share that, like, I'm not a big donor, right? I'm rich. And I have an AI major gift officer. I went to Columbia, and it is so fun to play with. Like, I also am blessed with the ability to wake up every night in the middle of the night and play with my phone. And I can really converse with this AI major gift officer. I can say, what research is happening at Columbia? And it can say to me, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll get back to you. And a couple days later, it texts me back. Kate, actually calls me Catherine. Catherine, I'd love to tell you about the answer to the question you asked a few days earlier. Is now a good time? And if you say yes, it starts GPT into your text messages a whole bunch of options. Here's the research we're doing in Teachers College. Is that an area of interest for you? I'm like, not really, but sure, tell me more. And so when I think about the relationship that I used to have with, I'm a little bit of a fundraising snob. And so when the very earnest new gift officer who's assigned to someone at my level calls me up and asks me if I want to have coffee, frankly, the answer is no. I really don't want to go have coffee with a junior fundraiser. It's not going to influence my giving. It's not going to do anything. But I'm having a lot of fun with this AI gift officer. It can tell me whole lots of things, like in a really short amount of time. And I'm learning great amounts of things about Columbia that really I never knew and that I don't read in the magazines they send me. So just personally, I would say, like, get creative, to your point, like personalize, and then think about opportunities. And just as a donor, that's just my perspective.
I want to know what it would take, having been the person that asked for that coffee for a long time and then told me, like, what would it take for you to say yes to the coffee, though?
I think Chelsea's advice, that you actually had some idea of what I was interested in. So again, like, I'm talking a lot about myself, but I think it's illustrative. I was an art history major. I thought I wanted to be the director of a museum and I should become a fundraiser in order to be a museum director. And then obviously you can see 30 years later, here I still am. But they send me things from Columbia, like without the AI gift officer, about giving to the art history program. I'm like, no more 19-year-old art history majors. Like, that's not what I want to give to, right? And so this, if you had personalized and someone had asked me what I really cared about, I'd say, well, I was a mentor for the Double Discovery program and I actually really care about kids in the neighborhood. And if you asked me for that and how Columbia can be a better neighbor in New York City, I might give to that. But I'm not really interested in art history scholarships at an Ivy League institution. That's not my philanthropic value. And so I think Chelsea's advice on, can you use AI to personalize, or can you use AI to help answer questions if you're a complex institution about what that donor is interested in and gather information so that then you as a human can personalize, then I'd probably take your call.
That's a great answer.
Sorry, so much about me.
I had a question. Yeah. My name's Molly. I am here with New Hampshire Humanities. I'm a board member, so I'm wearing that hat. I'm also a major gift officer at UNH. And I think in both places, I love the statistic that Jack mentioned. He said, what, 5% of ultra wealthy donors, 5% of their assets are liquid, and maybe everyone else, maybe 10%. I think none of my donors feel that abundance that we see in the charts, or that even their last 4 years of tax returns show them. They don't feel wealthy, most of them. And how do you bridge that gap between values and actual giving when I think they're hedging their bets against future uncertainty, most of the donors I work with. How do you kind of communicate that abundance, that possibility, that hope when it comes to giving, moving from values to giving? What's worked?
That's a great question. I think about this in a few ways. One being that I think there's no bad gift in philanthropy. There's only better gifts that you can give.
Tell most of my charismatic gift.
I would tell most people, like, even if it's small, if there's an organization you care about, that it's worth doing. And just to, feel like you're doing something. I also think there's a place for every type of giving. You don't have to be an ultra high net worth donor with a foundation, or with a big flashy name and logo, like Melinda Gates. Like community-based philanthropy is so valuable, and that's actually the majority of giving is people giving to their local organizations. And at VCF, our donor advised fund products are available at $25,000 as the starting point, and so it just speaks. It's an accessible tool, I think, for many people. And that said, I think it's also there's a delicate balance of trying to make sure that someone feels comfortable and excited about their gift, and that it's not going to be a stressor for them. And so walking that line and being really understanding of, I have a prospective new fund holder I've been working with who committed to working with us last year and has been but it took like 10 or 15 years, I think, for my predecessor to build that relationship. And even now we have a signed agreement, but they haven't actually been ready to move the money over. And so I've just been trying to go really slow and follow them at their pace. Their daughter just had twins. They just sold their house. Like they've just got a lot going on. And so just playing that long game and being really patient and understanding and knowing when and how you should or should not apply pressure. I think it's just really an art, right? And I think that sharing those stories in community with your peers, with your colleagues, is just the best way to kind of both connect over shared experiences and feel validated and supported, but also to learn from each other's lessons.
Yeah, I mean, that's like planned giving. I mean, to me, that's the hard part is once you've gotten them hooked on the big idea, then the plan giving is how you can get there. And that to me is where it becomes really fun, right? Once they're in, then you can get really technical, then you can get really creative. And, if you don't have the resources in-house, you've got the Vermont Community Foundation, you've got Raymond James, and we can come in and we can help you build the structure that your clients or your donors want to get to. And you don't have to be, to your point, you don't have to be transactional. Like just take a long view, introduce the idea. It takes some time to get comfortable. It takes some time to part with a lot of money. One of the times I worked at Harvard Business School for a very short amount of time, and we were working with this donor who was thinking he wanted to do a $5 million associate chair, and he was just having a hard time getting there. We introduced plan giving. We started talking about how we could use a charitable trust to help fund some of it now, some of it later. And after this kind of protracted conversation, I said, you know what, I can just do the $5 million now. So I think, slowing it down, meeting them where they're at, but coming up with some strategies, I think you'll find that you can get there, and you've got like really great resources to help you do that if your organization isn't sophisticated enough to have like an in-house plan giving person.
I'd also add that something our donors love is matching gifts. And I think that's a great kind of two-pronged tool to both get major donors to potentially get excited about giving more, and also to engage people at the lower levels. People just really like to know that their gift is being leveraged. They're part of a collective impact, and not just what's my gift going to make a difference about, but feeling plugged into something like that. That's one of the things that we love to see and that our donors get really excited about.
Thank you both. Such good advice and such a great panel. Give a round of applause.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. Let's have another round of applause for our Thank you all for being here with us this morning. Thank you for an incredibly informative and educational presentation, a really insightful and robust discussion, and just for taking the time to share your expertise with us today. We're really so grateful. So I hope that you will all join us back here on May 20th for our annual conference. We have a great day planned for you, and if you are not already a member, I'll just do my pitch for membership one last time. But again, programs like this are free, so wow, what an incredible value today, right? So if you're a nonprofit organization, $125 for the year, you can come to programs like this for free. Anyone from your organization can, actually. It's not just limited to one person. So I would really encourage you to join. We will be doing another program in the fall. We try to do about 4 a year, and you will get a discounted rate on the annual conference as well. So hope to see you all back here on May 20th. And again, thank you for being with us this morning. And thank you to Billings Farm for hosting us in this beautiful space today.